If you've recently signed on for the webinar, if you could go through and mute your phones for me, that would be great. Thank you. And we'll get started here in about 60 seconds. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, and I want to welcome you to this month's webinar with GITA, hosted by GITA on the Geospatial Data Act, where we have AAG's John Wertman here presenting for us. Before we get into that, I want to remind you all to please mute your phones for me and try and hold all of your questions to the end by utilizing the chat window, and we'll make sure we get all of your questions addressed at the end of the presentation. That way we give John as much time as he needs to get his point across. But please utilize the chat window for all of your questions. I want to remind everyone as well that the webinar is being recorded and will be available at gita.org within the next 24 or 48 hours. It'll take us a little bit to put everything together and get it out on the website for you. And before we get started with John, I'm actually going to do a shameless plug here for GITA and really go after members and encourage people to become members if they're not already members of GITA. So you should see my GITA logo here for you. And we're going to walk through and just kind of remind you of our mission. So our mission at GITA is to educate, connect, and advocate for the geospatial community. And our members are a big part of doing that. We really like to engage with our customers and with our members, really, to make sure we're doing what you guys need us to do. We're an advocate for you guys. Guys, you could please mute your phones for me. That would be fantastic. Also, our vision at GITA, we continue to be the premier geospatial association for enriching the broader geospatial community, and we really strive to meet that mark. And as the education liaison for the board, I kind of look for you guys to make sure we're holding true to that. I should actually fall back a little bit and introduce myself. My name is Drew Fiorinelli, and I currently sit on the board of directors for GITA. Sorry I didn't get that out of the way. I'm kind of excited here. Guys, for members, we like individual memberships, our premium affiliates, our standard affiliates, our educational affiliates, and our students. The best bang for your buck, guys, if you're out there with a corporation, is our premium affiliate membership. It's $3,000. That gets you 10 individual memberships. It also gets you this shameless plug at the beginning of any of our webinars, where we give the floor to you for 5 or 7 minutes to kind of get your point across and tell us who you are, kind of your introduction to GITA. We really want you guys to take advantage of that, and if you need more information on it, please feel free to reach out to me. So a couple of the benefits I have up here, I'm not going to go through here and read this screen, but we pride ourselves on being able to provide value back to the members, and we do it in several ways. We do these webinars at free of cost for anyone. We give you the opportunity to host or present in these webinars or present at conferences for us. So we've got Pipeline Week in Houston, Texas is coming up October 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And guys, my heart goes out to those of you that are in Houston or in Texas. Just know that our thoughts and prayers at GITA are with you right now. We also, March 6th through the 8th of next year in Phoenix is our CGA 811 meeting. So check that out. And then some of our past events are in Cannonsburg at EnerGIS. And we have a Wisconsin GITA data collection seminar that was this past April. Also, as a member of GITA, you have access to any of the professional development tracks that we do, and we also help you keep track of your GIS. You can create your own blog at our GITA website. And I'm hitting a lot of this stuff at a 10,000-foot level, guys. I'm sorry, but I really just kind of wanted to introduce you to what's going on. And also, keep in mind, we're getting our Texas chapter going back up again for GITA. Here's the information related to that, September 18th. Right now, we're still scheduled to have that meeting, but please stay tuned if that's something that you're interested in participating in. And we'll be throwing the updates out at gita.org as new information becomes available. All right, so that's my shameless plug, guys. I really appreciate y'all being with me for that. Guys, please, if you're coming in, please mute your phones for me. I'm trying to mute you as fast as I can, but I can only go so fast. So without further ado, I'm going to...
Can you concentrate in there or what?
I'm going to bring John Wertman on board, who you're here to listen to with the Geospatial Data Act. And John's the Senior Program Manager for Government Relations at the Association of American Geographers. He's the past chair of the Coalition of Geospatial Organizations, or COGO, and is now AAG's delegate to COGO. His career focuses on positions in and around politics, and he previously served as Special Assistant to the administration of President Bill Clinton. John also has held government relations positions at the Consortium for Social Science Associations, the University of Virginia Medical Center, and the American Urology Association. So John brings a lot of wealth and experience to this conversation, and we're really excited that he's here to talk about the geospatial data with us. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to John. So, John, you are now the presenter, sir.
Well, great. Thanks very much, Drew. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate GITA giving me the opportunity to do this webinar and share a few minutes with everybody today. I also, like Drew, want to send a quick word of regard to those of you in the Houston and wider Texas area that are dealing with this terrible storm. So obviously our thoughts here at the AAG are with everybody during this time of ordeal. So as Drew mentioned, I'm here today to speak about the Geospatial Data Act. So what I'm going to do is sort of take you through a little bit of the history of the bill, what its intent is, and talk a little bit about the controversy that some of you may have heard about with it, and why it's sort of been raised in its profile in recent weeks and months. Here's my name and association, and I am the Government Relations Director at the AAG. I have been with the AAG for about 13 years now. As Drew mentioned, I'm a previous chair of COGO and have been involved in COGO meetings and discussions for quite a few years. So the history of the GDA. The bill was first introduced in 2015. Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah has been the sponsor of the bill in both of its iterations that I'm going to talk about today. The 2015 version had 9 bipartisan co-sponsors, so including Senator Hatch, there were 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats supporting the bill. And before they ever dropped the GDA in the Senate back in 2015, Senator Hatch's staff and Senator Warner, who's the lead Democrat on the bill, their staffs did a terrific job of engaging with the geospatial community, with COGO, with FGDC, with many others, to really get a sense of what policies were needed to further federal workings for geospatial data in a number of different policy areas. So the bill is comprehensive and includes a lot of positive qualities. Here's a little bit about it. The original version of the GDA in 2015 had 10 sections. A big part of it was reauthorizing the FGDC, the Federal Geographic Data Committee, and the NGAC, which is the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. Most of you may know people who serve on the NGAC or are involved in the government and FGDC operations. The bill in 2015, The bill in 2015 also included significant provisions related to the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, the NGDA data themes, federal geospatial data standards, and the Geo platform. The bill in 2015, and it's also true of the version that exists this year, would change the chairmanship of FGDC, which is currently residing with the Secretary of the Interior, and it would switch it to the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. In each case, probably those agency heads would be appointing somebody to head FGDC, as has typically been done with Interior in recent years. But the primary reason for doing that is that OMB actually has statutory authority over its fellow federal agencies, whereas the Department of Interior can't really tell, the Defense Department or Homeland Security to do much of anything. So that was the thought behind switching the chairmanship to OMB. The legislation as it existed in 2015 was broadly supported by the geospatial community. I don't know of anybody who had significant concerns about the way it was implementing various things related to the NSDI. I think it had pretty broad-based support, and again, as I mentioned earlier, Senator Hatch's and Warner's staffs did a really terrific job of engaging with the community and getting a really good feel for what needed to go into the substance of the bill. The 2015 version of the bill, however, was blocked in the Senate Commerce Committee. It was never brought up for a hearing, and what I have been told directly by multiple people in the Senate was that it was blocked at the request of MAPS, which is an organization representing surveying and engineering and related firms. And MAPS asked that the bill not go through because they're concerned that there weren't procurement-related provisions in the GDA. So I'll scroll to the next slide here. I'm now on the 2017 bill, which is the current bill. It's S-1253 for those of you who may have seen it or want to take a look at it. The bill now includes two sections that were not included in the 2015 legislation. And in addition to the two new sections, the definition of geospatial data in the beginning part of the bill in Section 2 has been greatly expanded. And I'll get to the reason for that in a moment. Section 11, which is one of the two new sections, requires federal agencies to procure a vast range of geospatial data and services through using a 1972 law, which is known as the Brooks Architect and Engineers Act. The Brooks Act is focused on how the government should procure architecture and engineering services, and it includes a small piece of text that was added in the 1980s that references surveying and mapping. And that's where a lot of the controversy has come from in recent years in terms of how this bill has been interpreted and how the Brooks Act has been thought about in terms of referring to and applying to geospatial data and services. So the Brooks Act would limit procurement of federal geospatial data and services to only architecture and engineering firms the way it's currently written in the Senate version of the Geospatial Data Act of 2017. If implemented, we feel that this would have the impact of preventing most companies and organizations in the GIS industry from receiving any sort of federal contracts or grants for a huge range of geospatial data and activities. This would include GPS field data collection, GIS, internet mapping, geospatial analysis, and the other list of items that I've got there up on the slide. So obviously it would curtail a lot of activity outside of what could be procured through architecture and engineering firms and the surveyors that work for them. We've had discussions with Senator Hatch's office and with Senator Warner's office, the two lead sponsors on the bill. They have assured us that they did not intend any harm to the geospatial data field through the new language they included this year in Section 11. They've been working with us diligently and I think very fairly to try to come up with a potential solution. and we are still engaged with talks with those folks up on Capitol Hill. I want to make very clear that, at the AAG, and I think in a number of organizations across the geospatial data community, there still is broad support for the core Geospatial Data Act, which we view as sections 1 to 10. But we feel very strongly that the procurement language that was included in section 11 is extraneous and does not belong in the Geospatial Data Act. So that sort of talks to the key issues that I think Drew wanted to hit on in today's presentation. I'm sure there will be lots of specific questions, and I'm more than happy to answer those. But I just wanted to give that sort of broad overview about the bill itself, the history of it, and what it's intended to do, and a little bit about the controversial provision before we get into questions. So I think Drew is going to take control back over now, and I look forward to engaging with folks on the line.
Yeah. Hey, John, real quick, we do have a question on what happened between 2015 and 2017, and then why wait 2 years?
What happened in the sense of, why didn't the bill go through? Is that the question? That's all that I have is what happened between 2015 and 2017, and then why wait 2 years. I don't know if it was the bill going through or if language. Can you address why the bill may not have gone through then? Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned briefly in the presentation, I have been told by a couple of different people that there was an effort by MAPS and some of their members to try to block the bill from getting a hearing in the Senate Commerce Committee when it was first introduced in 2015. I do not know why MAPS blocked it beyond their desire for procurement language being included in the bill. I don't want to get into motives. I don't want to get into anything negative. I want this to be a positive discussion. But I will say that the original text of the GDA, as it was introduced in 2015, had broad-based support, and I feel that there are a lot of people who would have liked to have seen it get enacted then. As I mentioned, there were 10 bipartisan co-sponsors on the bill who come from a wide variety of states and a wide variety of, policy backgrounds and policy interests. So the only reason I know of that the 2015 version of the bill did not go through and why this procurement issue has come up this year with the added sections is because the bill was blocked by MAPS.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, John.
Sure.
Can you describe the specific need and benefit for the GDA Act, and just kind of why was it introduced to begin with?
Yeah. So as many people on the line are probably aware, there are a wide variety of policies that have been talked about or potentially implemented through the years related to how the federal government deals with geospatial data and shares geospatial data publicly and uses it. Most of those policies have gone in through executive orders, other types of executive actions, and decisions by the FGDC over the years. The intent of the GDA is to codify a lot of that language and really give it the full force and effect of law. And it would also have the impact of making it clear from a congressional intent that our legislators are focused on geospatial data issues. They want to see good government management with geospatial data, and that they feel like platforms like the Geo platform and the way the NSDI would be implemented would be effective tools and mechanisms for the federal government within the sphere of geospatial data management. So it's largely a good government bill. It has a broad base of support, broad backing from most of the folks I've spoken with in the various COGA organizations. And I've heard very few complaints about the language in sections 1 through 10. There are minor points that I think anybody could take issue with or want to change or tweak. But I think by and large, Senator Hatch and Warner's staff got it right as regards section 1 through 10.
Okay, since language is kind of a big focus of this act, why not just delete 11B and C and be done with it?
Well, I think a lot of people would like to do that, and you know, certainly that's where we at the AAG are at currently. We feel the most effective thing would be to pull sections 11B and C out and really make a strong push across the community to try to get the bill through the Senate Commerce Committee that way. You know, in other words, sort of revert it back to where it was in 2015 before the procurement language was added. I think the opposition from MAPS would probably remain to that approach. I'm not sure how the Senate Commerce Committee would react to efforts to try to pass the bill over objections of one group or one community. As has been explained to me, and as I know through my own experience of working in the political world for a number of years, whenever there's a bill that's not a hot button national topic, like say on healthcare or tax reform, if it's sort of an you know, under the radar issue for most members of Congress, they are looking for the least controversial approach possible. So when the Senate Commerce Committee gets a whiff of the notion that there's controversy about a bill, or you know, groups are on opposite sides of an issue, they're sort of hesitant to bring it up because they don't want to put their committee members in a delicate position of having to choose sides. So I think that's why opposition from any group to the bill has been successful up to this point, and why it has not really just sailed through the Senate Commerce Committee when it has the backing of so many groups and people.
Okay, thanks, John. Now, what's the all right, so let's look a little long term here, or short term, depending on how you want to look at it. What's the risk of the bill being approved and carry over to various state agencies and state procurement activities, and then what effect does that have on, you know, smaller geospatial shops or even smaller local government?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Drew. If the bill were passed and enacted as the current Senate language stands, so in other words, the introduced version of S-1253, we think it would have a really negative impact on small GIS shops, and also on, sort of as you alluded to, state policies. As you often see in the federal government, whenever the federal government adopts a sweeping law related to a specific policy area, most of the states will follow suit in one way or another. So we have real concern that if Section 11 were enacted, a lot of the states would move swiftly to put policies in place that would you know, give special procurement rights to you know, either licensed individuals or specific types of firms or businesses at the disadvantage of others. We think it's really critical, given the way that the GIS field has developed, the way it's become so successful and so robust, that there continue to be a free market approach within the geospatial community, and that, you know, when there are government contracts or when services are needed to be performed for the public in critical areas, such as Homeland Security and others, it should be an open competition. As many people as are qualified to be able to do the work should be able to apply for those contracts. And, you know, we believe continuing a free market approach is the right approach when it comes to government procurement for geospatial data.
Okay, now that focused a lot on government and small kind of private shops. So what about the academic community, and what if you are a GISP? So if you're a GISP, are you covered under this? And then what if you're non-government or non-private sector, you're academic, how does GDA affect you then?
Yeah, so, you know, obviously we've been really, really happy with the growth in the GISP community over the last decade or so. I think the last I knew, or the last I checked, there were almost 9,000 GISPs now, and the folks at GISCI and others have been doing a terrific job to really grow that program. There are a lot of GISPs who work for, you know, some of the engineering and other firms that are currently included for procurement under the Brooks Act. But, I would say the majority of GISPs work at GIS shops, work in academic communities, work for state and federal and local agencies. And a lot of those individuals would, lose out on the right to be able to perform federal government work, at least on a contracted basis, if Section 11 were enacted. And also, if you are a GISP who works for an engineering or architecture firm, or with a surveying community, you got to be concerned that, it's going to limit your job opportunities in terms of going outside of that type of firm environment. Speaking briefly about the academic perspective on this, I think there are two real concerns that geography and related departments are facing as it comes to the GDA. The first is, if Section 11 is implemented, I think there's going to be a real loss of grant and contracting opportunities for specific types of geospatial data services through the federal government, through the various agencies. And also, that could have a real negative impact on how geospatial education is taught in this country. There could be a real loss of geospatial students, of coursework. Many more individuals, might turn to looking for some sort of licensed profession, some sort of licensure education, rather than continuing to work through the existing educational pathways and streamlines that exist right now. So I think there are a couple of big concerns for the educational and university communities that are obviously such great innovators and partners in the geospatial field.
Right, and I actually agree with you from that point too. I've got some questions here related to organizations like Women in GIS or the Society for Conservation, and having interest in wanting to write letters and against this. What's your suggestion there? Do you send it to your senator? Do you send it to House? Do you send it to AAG? What options are available for the community to help show their concerns and or support just for the opposition for
yeah. Sure. So I want to make very clear here that I'm just speaking as an individual when I answer this question. I'm not answering this question on behalf of the AAG. The best thing any citizen can do when they have a concern about a particular bill is write a detailed letter to their member of Congress. They can send it in via snail mail, via email, or a lot of members of Congress and senators now have web submission forms for letters that the public wants to submit. Another approach is, going to a town hall meeting and engaging with your congressman or senator after the meeting to talk to them about specific concerns you may have about a particular issue. I can tell you, anecdotally, I've heard from dozens, hundreds of people who have been concerned about this particular piece of legislation and have been engaging with not only the sponsor offices on the Senate side and House side, but also, with other members of the Senate and other members of the House who either sit on relevant committees or are just, general members of Congress and, obviously would have any right to vote on the legislation once it would reach the Senate or House floor. So it's always a good idea to, write a detailed explanation of why you're concerned about a particular issue and share it with your representatives, your senators, or if you work for an institution, see if your institution might be willing to speak out. Whether that's from an academic community or if you work for a company that might be affected.
Okay, thanks, John. Here's a great question. What is the schedule of activities for this bill, and what are critical points in the schedule to note and potentially respond to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there has been mention in a couple of sources that there is sort of a thinking that the COGO and related communities are aiming to get something done by October 1. That is, I will say, a nominal goal, but I personally believe this conversation is going to continue long past that October 1 date. This procurement issue has been a question that's been a thorny one for COGO for 10 years now, and I think will continue to be for as long as the foreseeable future runs out. You know, it's not entirely clear to me, even with all the conversations I've had with people on the Hill and throughout the geospatial community, what the timelines on this bill are going to be. I would really like to see it go through as it existed in 2015. I think there's a lot of value to the core Geospatial Data Act, but I think, you know, there are real concerns about the language in Section 11 and potentially Section 12 as well. Until those sections are removed, that extraneous language in those two sections, I'm not really sure how this bill can get through Congress. I don't know what the answer, you know, from the opposite's perspective is. You know, the folks and groups who you know sought to block the GDA in 2015, what they might ultimately be willing to accept. But you know, I really personally believe that the best approach is to focus on passing the 2015 version of the GDA and, you know, setting aside the procurement issues, which are, you know, truly extraneous to the language in the core bill.
Okay, thanks, John. I do want to mention for a second from GITA standpoint, GITA actually left COGO because of Matt's unwillingness to agree to anything other than the Brooks Act. So GITA is no longer affiliated with COGO, and we've written a couple of position papers about the Geospatial Data Act as well that can be found at gita.org if you are interested, or you can shoot me an email and I'll forward the position paper to you. Let's get through a couple more questions here. They keep rolling in. I'm really liking the engagement though. People are having some great questions, John. Can you explain how COGO votes to get anything done, or COGO's votes towards this?
Yeah, so as you just alluded to, Drew, COGO is an interesting organization. It includes a lot of the leading groups in the geospatial field. One, you know, sort of tricky feature of it is that any single organization within COGO can veto COGO action on any particular bill or issue. So it's a consensus-based organization, and you know, we have 2 annual meetings, semi-annual meetings. One is typically in the February-March period, and we often hold that in conjunction with meetings in Annapolis going on at the time, Annapolis, Maryland. And then the summer July meeting is typically at the Esri User Conference in San Diego. COGO, you know, over the years has taken a strong and meaningful stand on a lot of issues, you know, stuff related to federal funding of K-12 geography education, things related to common sense, you know, issues related to geospatial data, bills where, you know, there might be a general good usage of geospatial data within a particular policy sphere. But it's been these procurement issues that have really sort of hindered COGO activity on a lot of particular bills over the years. You know, we treat each other with respect in COGO, which is all you can ask sometimes. People are going to have legitimate differences of opinion, and you know, we keep on engaging with each other, and we keep those lines of communication open. You know, hopefully, I think the fact that so many, or maybe even all COGO organizations believe in what's in the core part of the Geospatial Data Act, sections 1 through 10 can carry the day, and we can get that part of the bill passed without having to deal with these thorny procurement issues. So perhaps I'm an optimist on that question, but I think there is a lot of good in the base part of the bill, and I think a lot of the COGO groups would like to see that go through.
Okay. Hey, John, on that point, you mentioned earlier about the expansion of the definition of geospatial data. Can you kind of review that again and, you know, kind of tell us what that means?
Yeah, so the original version of the definition of geospatial data was quite short, and I don't have the exact text in front of me, but basically it just gave a basic definition of what geospatial data was, and you know, how it might be applied to things like the NSDI, agency operations, the Geo platform for public, you know, data sharing. The definition, however, this year was greatly expanded, and I'll tell you why. The language in Section 11 that deals with the Brooks Act and that deals with procurement basically would take the definition of geospatial data that's in the GDA this year in Section 2, and folks can go on congress.gov and pull up the text of the bill and look at it there. And it would take that whole expansive definition of geospatial data and basically make that huge definition have the full force and effect of what's currently defined just very briefly as surveying and mapping in the Brooks Act. So it would basically give architecture and engineering firms total procurement control over a huge array of geospatial data issues, of geospatial data services. And, you know, there has been some attempt on Capitol Hill and in various discussions in COGO and elsewhere to try to limit the definition that was in the Senate version of the bill. And if you look at the House version of the bill that exists and was introduced about a month ago, there is a more limited version of geospatial data, but it's still very expansive as compared to the limited term of surveying and mapping that appears in the Brooks Act currently. And we still feel quite strongly that the definition in the House version of the law, the legislation, is still too expansive and would put too much under the auspices of what the government agencies would have to procure working only with architecture and engineering firms. So it all sort of comes down to how you interpret what's in the bill currently, how you interpret that in relationship to the Brooks Act, and what the real world impacts might be of that added language being put into law. And we think at the end of the day, it leaves a lot open to interpretation by, you know, agency officials, by potentially even judges. There was a 2007 court case related to these related and other procurement issues. MAPS at that time sued the federal government, and there was a case that ultimately ended in what's called summary judgment, where the judge determined that the MAPS claims had no basis, and the case was thrown out. But we're concerned that if legislation is enacted, such as what's in Section 11 currently, that it would give judges a lot more latitude or leeway, or they might be more inclined to issue a ruling that would be a big negative for a huge swath of the GIS community.
Right, and I completely agree with you there, John. So as a perceived path forward, would you agree that for those that want to just kind of voice their opinion, continue to reach out to their representatives, or even reach out to their local geospatial organizations and write position papers either for or against the Geospatial Data Act? Just trying to get an idea of what options we can get for people moving forward and helping to either fight it or support it.
Yeah, I mean, again, taking my AAG hat off and just speaking as an individual observer on this bill, that is certainly a good way forward. You know, obviously, the more dialogue that occurs about this, the more understanding of it that there is. There might be more impetus on Capitol Hill to try to get a bill enacted. If people have valuable perspectives on, you know, how this bill, the current language might impact their business, their university, the community they work in, the community they are involved in academically, those perspectives could be really valuable. So, you know, there are lots of forums for online discussion on this bill. And of course, you know, contacting your elected representatives in Congress is a valuable way to move that discussion forward. And, you know, as I mentioned, the COGO organizations are continuing to talk about what we might, how we might approach the language that's in the bill. So if you belong to one of the COGO organizations, working with your membership chairs or your representatives there is a great idea. So yes, I mean, I believe strongly in engagement, and I think the more perspectives that are brought to bear on this, the closer we might be to having a real common understanding of where we need to be.
Right, I completely agree. Hey, John, you actually still have control of the presentation. Do you mind rolling back up to your very first slide with your contact information? And can people email you if they want a copy of your slides? So the presentation will be available at gita.org as a recording, but if someone actually wants the slides, is it all right if they reach out to you directly or if they have questions?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I didn't put the contact information on there, but I'm more than happy to give people my email address right now. It's just my first initial and my last name, so it's JWERTMAN @aag.org. Again, jwertman@aag.org. And I'm more than happy to send people my slides or answer questions over email. You know, look forward to that continuing engagement on this important issue.
Perfect. Hey, and John, if you don't mind, I'll actually host your slides at gita.org as well, just to give people another outlet.
That would be fine. Yeah.
Okay. We've answered a lot of questions. I think we've gotten a lot of the more repetitive questions out of the way. Can you think of anything else that you want to add about the Geospatial Data Act, John?
No, I mean, I'll just make a final push for it. I mean, I think the core bill, sections 1 through 10, would be really valuable and would do a lot for the geospatial community, both in the federal government, in the private sector, and in state and local governments, and also in the academic community. And I think there is a broad consensus that it's valuable language, that it's good language, and you know, we really hope that at the end of the day we can overcome this little disagreement or kerfuffle over these procurement issues and keep them out of the bill, but pass the core bill.
Right, that sounds great, John. Man, I really appreciate it. If you're on and we didn't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to John directly or reach out to GITA. You can reach out to me, and we'll make sure we can get your question answered as best as we can. Again, the recording will be up in the next 24 or 48 hours at gita.org. John, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Drew, and thanks to everybody.
All right, thanks, John. I'm going to take control of that.
Okay.